Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. In today's conversation with WRAL reporter Matt Talhelm, we're talking about what to do with all of that empty office space in the Triangle. Let's face it, everywhere you look, there are high-rise office buildings that seem to be empty or at least partially empty in our area. Currently, 18.1% of the office space in the Triangle is vacant. And at the same time, a new study reveals that the Raleigh area is in need of 17,000, yes, I said 17,000 housing units. So we wanted to know if that empty office space could be reconfigured into residential space. And this is something that is being done in some other cities. Matt Talhelm investigated this and joins us in this episode to share what he learned. Matt, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So I read an article about this happening a couple weeks ago in New York City. Same situation, a lot of empty office space, a lot of that as the result of the pandemic. And, these high rises seem like a great place to create apartments, but there's a lot of challenges involved with this, right? Like plumbing, electrical, the configuration. What are some of the obstacles when people talk about doing this?
Well, you think about how office towers in particular are built. They have a center core usually with an elevator, that kind of system there. And then there's just a lot of open space around them. So you might have offices inside that don't have any windows. Well, you can't have an apartment without a window. That's
Correct,
something
right.
that's just not allowed. And also when you look at the plumbing, usually there's one restroom in an office on a floor. When you have to bring the plumbing out to every unit in there, that gets expensive. So a lot of these things, it's just not as easy as people think to just go,
outfit it.
Yeah,
right.
Put some walls in and make a kitchen and a bathroom, and you've got the space there for an apartment. Even just some of the basic code things that the cities require, it's hard to meet the code for residential versus an office building.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it is happening in a few places. And one good example that you found is a building that used to be a hotel in North Hills. And now they are transforming that into residential space. And there are some challenges, but they're making it happen. Tell us about that project.
Yeah, this is an example of a commercial conversion into housing. So they had 127 hotel rooms. They'll have 127 apartments. They didn't have to do anything when it comes to changing those rooms. They're keeping them the same size. So think about your typical hotel room. What they've done is put up a wall to separate the bedroom from a living room. They've added kitchens into them. Now, because they can't put an oven hood and those kind of things in every room there, what they have done is put essentially a hot plate kind of thing that can be put up on the counter that people can use to cook. They also put in these microwaves that are microwave ovens so that
convection ovens, right.
Something that's simple like that, people can get everything they need in that space. They're designed for people who don't spend a lot of time in their apartments.
And so kind of an efficiency, if
Yeah.
you will, when you rent a hotel room, for example, that has a small kitchen, something like that.
Exactly. And so they've been able to do that. It has had some challenges somewhat just because it's one of the first upfits like this in the city. So they've run into some challenges with getting the city to approve certain things, and they've had to reconfigure how they do some of these upfitting and these retrofitting because this isn't being done here yet. And so they've had to go through those challenges. It's taken a little longer than they expected and a little bit more money than they expected at first, but it's working for them. They're going to rent them for $11.45, which sounds like a lot, but it's way below hundreds,
market,
hundreds of dollars below the typical market apartment right now, especially in North Hills.
So really good for maybe young people starting out and, just their first apartment.
Yep.
They don't have the money to go higher than that. So that's great.
That's who they're targeting, the people who this is their first apartment, maybe right out of school, or they're coming here for work. A lot of traveling nurses. Duke Hospital is right nearby there in Midtown. So they're hoping that those are the people that will rent these because, again, they don't want to spend a lot of time in their apartment. They go, they pick up their food to go, they heat it up, and they're done for the day.
Exactly. Well, we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. So, Matt, before the break, we were talking about the challenges of converting, commercial space, specifically office space, to residential space. And what you discovered is that there's a lot more of just taking down the old and putting up the new. Is that what we're seeing in Raleigh?
Yeah, we talked to the city's planning director about this, and I specifically said, are we going to see these office buildings being converted into housing? And he said, not really. It's too expensive. It's honestly it's cheaper to just tear down the building and build something new, somewhat because of what we talked about earlier when it comes to converting that space. So he doesn't think we'll see that. He also doesn't think we'll see a whole lot of new development of those big office high rises. Right now, it's hard to get the loans for that money to be able to build those because there's so much uncertainty. People don't know if they're going to even be in an office as much as they were before the pandemic. So it's interesting that we won't be seeing as much of that like we have in other cities like New York, Philadelphia. They've taken older office buildings that are a little bit easier to convert. They've been able to do that, but these newer, the glass buildings that we see downtown, those are not as easy to be converted.
Okay, so Matt, tell me about the building that was once owned by the Episcopal Diocese in Raleigh. What's happening to that property now and why?
Yeah, so it's a small, older office building, just 3 stories there in downtown. Prime location, of course. That's one of the reasons the diocese even bought this. I believe in 2003 is when they bought it. They wanted to move downtown. They saw it as an investment property. There were other tenants in it until shortly before the pandemic. The last tenant moved out, so now they basically just have 2 of the 3 floors that are just sitting empty. They're vacant. They look like an old office building. It's kind of eerie to go inside there. They don't need this space either. They started working more remotely during the pandemic, so they don't even need as much office space. They decided to put it on the market. They sold it to for $9.1 million to a developer from Chicago, and that developer's plan is to tear down that office building and build multifamily housing, a high-rise, apartment building there.
So you mentioned earlier that you talked to the planning director for the city, Patrick Young, and he talked about, the ratio of residential space versus, the high-rise space. And the city's approved, a 412% increase in office space, but in residential space, but just a 21% increase in office space. So really, the residential seems to be outpacing the office. So
Definitely.
We're probably going to see more building of residential and less of office. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, in 2019, so before the pandemic, the city approved 745 residential multifamily units. Last year, they approved 3,818. So that just shows you how much of a demand there is.
Big difference.
Yeah, and we talked about that shortage of housing. It is easier. People need a place to live no matter what happens, whether there's another pandemic or something crazy. They need a place to live. They may not need an office to go to as much. And so because it is easier still to get the money for developers to build those multifamily housing units, they are doing that. It's harder to do that when it comes to offices, again, because of so much uncertainty there. And you look at that vacancy rate, 18.1% in this last quarter. And while that's down slightly from earlier this year, it's about double what it was, I believe, in 2018. So there's so much office space. If it's not the best kind of office, the kind that people want, the bright, airy, open offices there, it's just sitting empty.
I gotcha. Well, thank you so much for breaking this down for us and explaining it. And please take a minute to give us a 5-star rating in Apple Podcasts. Your rating and review will help other listeners find the show. We appreciate it. As always, thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download.